Hello, everyone. Welcome to Nature-Based Infrastructure Solutions to Enhance Resilience. My name is Kurt Hull. I'm Project Manager for Engineers, Geoscientists, Manitoba, and the infrastructure sector of the BRACE MCRT project. This course is part of the Manitoba Climate Resilience Training Project, MCRT. MCRT supports the Climate and Green Plan's vision for Manitoba to be the most climate resilient province in Canada. This is a cost-shared project supported by the Manitoba Climate and Green Plan Implementation Office and by Natural Resources Canada through its Building Regional Adaptation Capacity and Expertise, the BRACE program. BRACE itself is part of the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change. Before we get started, it's appropriate to acknowledge the land that we share and our responsibility to it. Engineers, Geoscientists, Manitoba acknowledges that our offices are on Treaty 1 territory. We further acknowledge that Manitoba shares the traditional territories of the Ojibwe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and is the homeland of the Métis Nation. We acknowledge the ingenuity, science, trades, and technologies of the first people of our province. History tells us that those first people took care of the land and developed unique ways and methods of design to survive in our province's harshest conditions. We acknowledge and appreciate their role as Manitoba's original engineers and geoscientists. Now, this course is part of the infrastructure stream. And we've been offering up until now a number of courses as part of the MCRT smorgasbord of courses, and this is part of the infrastructure stream. And so this is the last course of the specific courses that have been offered by our part of the project, the infrastructure courses. And I hope that you've been able to attend as many as you can. And if you have not, you can still access the recordings on mcrtproject.ca website. So some housekeeping to get started here. We've got that this course is being recorded. You've probably received a notice when you logged in, and your participation confirms your agreement to that. Your cameras and microphones are going to be off for the majority of the time that we're going to have together, the 90 minutes that we're going to have together. During that time, there will be opportunities for feedback to the presenter through polls, and you'll get some notification in a couple of slides from Darren as to Slido and how to access those polls. It's not going to be through Zoom. It'll be through a different platform, Slido. So, but lots of fun, and it works really well. So during the presentation, the chat will be open, and we'll be monitoring the chat as we go along. There will be an opportunity after the 90 minutes is over. The presenters will be sticking around for additional conversation, so you can participate in that. But if you have comments that are like of a technical nature, if you've got issues technically, we've got Gemma is standing by, and if you direct those issues through the chat to NGOMB, then Gemma will look after you. So, and following this presentation, there will be a follow-up survey sent to you. And so I recommend that you identify yourselves by, at the bottom of your screen, clicking on participants, scroll until you see your name in the list, and then when you hover over your name, click the more and then rename. So you can change your name, and then we can see who you are, so that we know who to send the handouts and follow-up PDF of the deck to you. Don't do it in the chat. Do it in the. But if you're having trouble, you can do it in the chat through Gemma. She'll help you out. So with no further ado, then we'll introduce you to the presenters. So the presentation today is going to be given by our friends at IISD, International Institute for Sustainable Development. IISD is an award-winning independent think tank working to accelerate solutions for a stable climate, sustainable resource management, and fair economies. IISD works to advance the protection and management of freshwater and advance climate action in Manitoba and around the world. IISD was founded in 1990 and now has offices in Winnipeg, Ottawa, Toronto, and Geneva. It has over 120 staff and associates working in over 50 countries. And our presenter today is Darren Swanson. Darren is a senior associate with IISD and lead author of the Institute's recent report on advancing the resilience of Canadian infrastructure. He provides risk, foresight, and sustainability advice and training for United Nations agencies, international organizations, governments, communities, and businesses. Darren holds a master's degrees in civil engineering from the University of Saskatchewan and in public administration and international development from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. And with that, I will turn things over to the able hands of Darren. Take it away, Darren.
Thank you very much, Kurt, and welcome everyone. A special thanks to the BRACE program and also to Engineers and Geoscientists Manitoba for the opportunity to pull this training course together. And it was a team at the International Institute for Sustainable Development. Joellen Perry, the Director of Adaptation with the Resilience Program of IISD, and also Jeffrey Chi, Policy Analyst with the Resilience Program, helped contribute to the slides here today. We have, I guess, a three-part session here today, three components that we'll touch on. First is an introduction to just lay the groundwork, get some terminology, look at some examples, introductory level look at natural infrastructure, nature-based solutions. In the second session, we'll get into a bit more detail looking at planning and design considerations, still at quite a high level across generic to planning and design considerations, generic to natural infrastructure. And we'll also have a guest presenter, Dr. Hank Venema, who will give us an example of planning and design considerations for a very specific type of natural infrastructure. So we'll hear from Hank a little later on. In the third part, we will get into financing considerations, talking about benefit cost analysis for natural infrastructure, nature-based solutions, also mobilizing capital, because there are some nuances that differentiate natural infrastructure from traditional built infrastructure. And of course, as Kurt mentioned, we will have an extra Q&A session at the very end where we can try to look through and field questions from the room. We also have Jeffrey Chi with IISD. He's in the virtual space in the chat room. And so if there are questions that you are placing in the chat space throughout the session, and if they're answerable with a tweet-like response, Jeffrey will try to take care of that before we hit the main Q&A session. So off and running. Kurt mentioned we are going to use polls and quizzes throughout this session for interactivity. And there's two ways you're going to be able to access your polls. One is if you have your phone handy, your smartphone, you can just use your camera of your smartphone. There'll be a barcode that will be presented, and you can just move your camera to that barcode, and a little sort of yellow highlight should pop up, and you'll be able to touch on that. That will send you to your browser in your mobile phone. But no worries if you don't have your mobile phone handy, or if it's in the other room, you can just go straight to an internet browser on your computer and type slido.com, and I'll give you a code that you can use. So that's how we're going to operate. So why don't we just get right to it and start off with the poll. So on the screen here, you have the barcode. So you can take, as I'm doing right now, your camera and click on that, and that will open up the poll on your phone. And this question is, and of course, if you don't have your phone, there's the Slido. Go to slido.com and type 898-510 into the the box, and you'll be into the poll. And the question is, what types of climate hazards are you most concerned about right now? And we're seeing the word cloud developing, and flooding is obviously a big topic. We've got wildfire, we've got drought, extreme weather, temperatures, heat. We've got the whole gamut of climate hazards that Manitoba is experiencing. We're seeing on the screen right now in front of us. All right, we've got a good participation here across the Slido, so people are clearly getting a good sense for this. Sea level rise, yes, Manitoba's got coastlines. That is going to be an issue, and we're going to talk about that. We got water quality, permafrost, yes, indeed. So we've got everyone here has a good sense for what we're seeing. All right, good. That was a good warm up. Nice job, everybody. Let's take a look at who's in the room first. So when we did the registration process, you in fact were asked a few questions, and you told us about what sectors that you were working in. And so as you see here right now, we have really a broad cross section of sectors represented in the training here today, from consultants to suppliers to government representatives, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. We've got academia, not-for-profit, and cross-sectoral groups, workers that are working across sectors. We do have a lot that responded to the other categories. So I'd be curious if you want to warm up your chat function. For those of you that registered under the other category, if you want to just briefly in the chat function, just mention the sector that was under the other, and we get a chance to see the real cross section of folks that are in the room here today. We also asked you in the registration process about your level of experience with natural infrastructure. And from the screen here, the results, and as to be expected for a training program, about half of the participants here in the room today are familiar with natural infrastructure, but not necessarily having direct experience. We have about a third where natural infrastructure is really a completely new topic. And then of course, maybe about a third here that have either planned or designed infrastructure or have done some research on natural infrastructure and nature-based solutions. And this is exactly what the training was designed for. There's a little bit here for everybody at all levels of experience. But in general, this is an introductory course, but of course, there's details here for professionals. All right, before we launch into the very first part of the session, just to kind of take stock of why we're here. So we did see the range of climate hazards in the word cloud here in the first Slido poll. And this slide here is courtesy of our friends at the Prairie Climate Center here at the University of Winnipeg. And they produced a very handy report a while back on a summary of climate change impacts and change across Manitoba. And what you see here is just an example from Winnipeg. And climate is changing. We have a comparison in this table of the recent past to the near future, which is the latter part of the century. And of course, we've got the hottest temperature of the year is projected to go up by about 4.8 degrees compared to the recent past. And that is in this what's called a high carbon future, where we don't manage to really control emissions very well over time as a global community. We have the average coldest temperatures of the year in Winnipeg are projected to be about the coldest temperature is about 6.2 degrees warmer than in the recent past. We've got the average number of days above 25 degrees Celsius, looking at about 43 more days of those types of temperatures in a given year. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got cold days, below 0 days, looking at about 40 less of those types of days in a given year. The frost-free season, you can see about 34 more than the recent past. So that's going to have clearly some impacts. And of course, there's also reported by the Prairie Climate Center changes in winter and spring precipitation going up by about 25%, and summer precipitation going down by maybe 6% compared to the recent past. So we do have a lot of climate change projected here in the province, which is why we're here today, looking at ways that we can build resilience. So let's get started by first clearing the deck here with some terminology, because, well, there's a lot of terminology. So let's take a look at that. First off, so we've got a framework paper from the Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment put out last year that's helped us out with terminology. And they define natural infrastructure as the use of preserved, restored, or enhanced elements of combinations of vegetation, biology, land, water, and naturally occurring ecological processes. And importantly, it's to meet targeted infrastructure outcomes. Now that's an important part of the natural infrastructure definition, is that nature being used to achieve targeted infrastructure outcomes. And this, I guess, differentiates it from another term that you've heard a lot, and we've used in the title also, is nature-based solutions. You'll hear this term used a lot in the international discourse, and it represents a broader term where nature is harnessed to deliver and address societal challenges. It may not be for a very specific targeted infrastructure outcome, but for other societal benefits. And so you'll see that term used a lot. You'll also see the term green infrastructure used. And particularly if you're involved in asset management, natural asset management, municipal asset management, you'll hear the term green infrastructure used. And also in terms of natural assets. So green infrastructure being three components, essentially: natural assets that are pure assets like wetlands, forests. There will be enhanced assets that incorporate elements of design, such as stormwater ponds or bioswales, which we'll talk about later. And at the far end of the spectrum is a third category called engineered assets, where things like permeable pavements and green roofs, where there's a significant design element. So green infrastructure does cover a lot of territory as well. And importantly too, another term to keep on the radar screen is, of course, gray infrastructure or built infrastructure. And the Council of Ministers of the Environment gives us, that's the stuff built with the bricks and mortar, the concrete, the bridges and the dams. Those are the built infrastructure, our roads. And that's an important term because there is another class of terms called hybrid infrastructure that really is a merger of both built infrastructure and nature-based solutions, natural infrastructure to deliver and address resiliency for extreme events. You'll see this term used quite a bit in coastal regions where there's a lot of combination of natural and engineered structures. And it's really about sort of combining this to really achieve sort of superior outcomes and benefits in terms of resilience. So there's a lot of terminology there. Good to kind of know the whole landscape of definitions that is out there. But before we get started, a little bit further, let's look at some examples. We want to just sort of see, what does natural infrastructure really look like? So here's a quick video for just to kind of whet our appetites in terms of some examples of natural infrastructure here on the prairies, and then we'll break it down a bit right after this. So just a couple-minute video to sit back and listen, courtesy of our friends at the International Institute for Sustainable Development.
We want to talk to you about natural infrastructure. It might sound like a technical or complicated concept, but it's actually pretty simple. It involves humans managing and taking care of nature so that in return, nature can take care of humans now and in the future. And with a rapidly changing climate, it looks like we need the benefits of nature-based solutions more than ever. Take the Canadian prairies, for example, home to 80% of the country's farmland. Managing water here is a constant challenge. Spring melt often leads to flooding, followed by drought conditions later in the summer. And of course, climate change is making these conditions worse. Farmers across the prairies have no choice but to adapt to the impacts of climate change.
Welcome to Purkis Farms. Over the last quite a few years, we're not getting the snow melt runoff in the spring that we normally would count on to fill the lakes and dugouts and whatever, and that causes problems.
What they need is to limit flood damage and guard against drought.
Welcome to Pelly's Lake.
Pelly's Lake in southern Manitoba is surrounded by prime agricultural land used to grow canola, wheat, alfalfa, and barley. For decades, farmers would try to drain the land to increase farm production, but this led to challenges.
There's culverts downstream between there and the Boyne River that aren't as large, so we would overwhelm those.
However, in 2015, the International Institute for Sustainable Development teamed up with the Red Boyne Watershed District on a different kind of infrastructure project, a managed wetland designed with these local water challenges in mind. This is a classic nature-based solution.
The way Pelly's Lake works is it's a natural low-lying area. So the water all comes in from the far end, it collects into Pelly's Lake, and then all that water passes out on the far end. So what's been done is there's a water control structure that was built, and that allows us to control the water flow. We can stop it in the springtime, hold on to that water, keep that water in the reservoir. We can slowly release that water when it's needed, and that helps recharge the water downstream as well during dry periods.
Cattails grow abundantly in the low-lying area. They are harvested and burned as biofuel, preventing excess phosphorus from washing downstream into Lake Winnipeg.
Let's look sort of a current day look at examples of natural infrastructure on the prairie landscape. But of course, nature-based solutions is not a new thing. It's being talked about now a lot more in terms of integrating with built infrastructure, but nature-based solutions have been around for a long time. And our colleagues in the chat space aptly noted that Indigenous people and communities have been doing this for a millennium now in terms of harnessing nature for well-being. So that's why traditional ecological knowledge, traditional knowledge is going to be so important. And we're going to talk about that a bit more here going later in the presentation when we get into whole of society approach under planning and design considerations. So the video talked a lot about co-benefits, and that's really a big part of nature-based solutions and natural infrastructure, is that in addition to sort of our built infrastructure, natural infrastructure provides a range of co-benefits, whether it's for climate resiliency, biodiversity, and ecosystem integrity, or solving other broader societal issues, including mental health issues. So we have, in fact, evidence and data that's showing that about 28% more added value can be achieved through the incorporation of natural infrastructure and nature-based solutions. And that's an important statistic. So co-benefits are a big thing, and we're going to be coming back to that. It's also important to note the complementary nature of natural and built infrastructure. And of course, we have in our the Climate and Green Plan from the provincial government here in Manitoba, noting and highlighting that green and natural infrastructure can be introduced as cost-effective options to provide more enduring resilience to extreme events. We also have at the federal government level, emphasizing through the Canada Strength and Climate Plan, emphasizing that embracing the power of nature to support healthier families and more resilient communities is a key aspect going forward. We also have at the global level. So for example, the Global Commission on Adaptation, led by the likes of Bill Gates and other business leaders, talking about how governments can embrace and use and raise the understanding of the value of nature for climate adaptation, embedding nature-based solutions into policy and planning, and increasing investment in there. So a broad context, natural infrastructure, nature-based solutions becoming a more common term and technology approach being used in resiliency. Scale and cost effectiveness is a really key aspect of nature-based solutions. And we have studies at the IISD's Global Resource Center for Nature-Based Infrastructure showing us that natural infrastructure costs can be up to 50% less lower in terms of capital and ongoing maintenance costs compared to built and gray infrastructure. And it's also analysis and evidence suggests that about 50% of climate resilient infrastructure needs could be met through natural infrastructure solutions. So that's an important dimension to think about. We have here on the screen, of course, some examples from International Community, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, stressing that it can be a cheaper approach than relying solely on gray infrastructure. We've got the Insurance Bureau of Canada talking about how nature-based solutions are a cost-effective way to deal with financial losses from floods, as well as providing other social benefits. So let's take a look here. What we want to do now is sort of break it down, look at some more examples like we did see in the video. And of course, we're going to see natural infrastructure solutions across a range of different landscapes that we'll see in Manitoba, from coastal to urban to riverine and to rural landscapes. So we're going to take a look at each of those. Before we do, let's take another quick poll here. When you did register, you did actually tell us what landscapes that you were interested in terms of natural infrastructure. But for this poll, take a look at addressing the question of what are you interested in? So going forward, what are the landscapes that you're interested what landscapes do you most often work in right now in your business? Right now and in the past and now, where are you working? And I guess we're looking here and seeing on the screen results pouring in. Now, your poll will still be on your phone. If you had scanned the code, it'll just automatically appear on your phone or on your internet browser, but you can scan the barcode again if you kind of lost your screen. As we can see here, okay, a lot of people are working in the urban cities and towns environments. We've of course got a lot of people working in rural Manitoba, and also people dealing with different landscapes like riverine landscapes, coastals and shorelines, our forest areas, and northern areas dealing with the tundra. Okay, excellent. As we anticipated, of course, professionals and experts and everybody on the line here in the training has worked across a number of different landscapes. All right, so let's get in and look at a few landscapes right now. Let's start with our urban environment. We have in urban and cities and towns, we've got, of course, extreme precipitation events that are climate hazards. And for that, we have nature-based solutions out there, such as permeable pavements that can help manage runoff. We have retention ponds and rain gardens that are being deployed in cities and towns. For dealing with extreme heat, which we saw earlier in the word clouds, participants concerned about, nature-based solutions like green roofs, trees and other urban forests, other types of vegetation can provide cooling effects. And these are all really quite important types of natural infrastructure that are in the urban environments, and providing co-benefits. Recreation, for example, improved mental health, improved air quality. We'll come back to that again in a little while. So lots of co-benefits, lots of different types of natural infrastructure. And we have provided a handout, a supplementary handout that you'll receive after the training that really gives you a whole list of other types of natural infrastructure that have been deployed in urban and town settings, and with links to resources to where you can find more detail. And of course, a couple of pictures of this is what it looks like. In Winnipeg, of course, we've got green roofs appearing on places like Manitoba Hydro Building. We've got the use of retention ponds, of course, in the city here in Winnipeg, and some of the suburbs where retention ponds are used to manage stormwater and also provide a real benefit for recreation in terms of walking and hiking trails, mental health benefits, and a little bit of hockey here and there. Let's take a look now at sort of outside of urban settings. We have riverine settings, of course, where we got river systems going across our landscapes, and of course going through urban and town environments. In these areas, we've got flooding is a big concern with climate change going forward. And we've got solutions, nature-based solutions like reforestation or floodplain restoration, wetland restoration to really help manage water on the landscape. We've got on the other end of the spectrum, of course, we've got drought that will be more intense and more frequent going forward. And that can also be managed through a lot of these other nature-based solutions like reforestation, floodplain management, riverbank vegetation and seeding. So a lot of solutions that can help with both too much water and not enough water, and also water quality benefits, co-benefits for nutrient reduction, providing species habitat. So lots of different co-benefits that come from different types of nature-based solutions. And again, in your supplemental handouts, you'll receive a whole laundry list of different solutions from the riverine landscapes. And of course, a few photos here from the water quality side. You'll hear things like floating treatment wetlands that can be used in sort of when the rivers are sort of ending up in lake systems. Floating treatment wetlands can be used to soak up phosphorus, nutrients to improve water quality. We of course have the Red River floodway in Winnipeg, a really good classic example of a hybrid solution where canals built, floodways built, riverbank vegetation, as you see here in the picture. So obviously providing an incalculable sort of benefit from a flood mitigation perspective for Winnipeg, but also providing habitat for various species, opportunities for recreation, the trails that appear around the Red River floodway as well. All right, let's take a look at just outside of a riverine landscape and outside of cities and towns. We've got, of course, our rural landscapes, lots of land out there where we've got lots of wind, as we all know about. So wind being an issue going forward with climate change, more intense windstorms, more erosion. And we've got nature-based solutions like shelter belts to help sort of protect against wind, particularly very helpful for agricultural resilience and also for transportation resilience on our roadways. We've got green belts, of course, that can protect the riverine sort of components of our rural settings and provide erosion stability. We've of course got wildfires that participants mentioned they're going to be concerned about, and that's going to be a more frequent occurrence that we're hearing more and more about in the news going forward with climate change. And we've got various approaches to deal with that are shelter belts, windbreaks, green belts, open spaces, buffer zones to help with wildfire management. And again, the supplementary handout will provide a bit more of a laundry list of various types of natural infrastructure solutions of that type. A few photos here. We saw earlier the Pelly's Lake being an engineered wetland in the rural landscapes, providing a number of benefits, not only flood and drought management, but also co-benefits for nutrient reduction, as we heard. We have here just a photo of construction of shelter belts along the Trans-Canada Highway on the way to Brandon from Winnipeg. And of course, anyone who's driven that road in the wintertime knows the protection that shelter belts provide the highway during the winter months in terms of conditions of the highway. So seeing a lot more of this type of nature-based solution being used in combination with built infrastructure. And last but not least, Manitoba has thousands of kilometers of shoreline, including coastal line. So we have sea level rise that will be of concern up in our northern coasts, Churchill facing. So we got sea level rises and a host of nature-based solutions and natural infrastructure, ranging from perched beaches and dunes to artificial reefs to plant stabilization. These solutions, so we see combinations of, we have hybrid solutions here. We also have storm surges and that will be more frequent. And these types of nature-based solutions and natural infrastructure will help build resilience, as well as providing co-benefits, whether it range from aquatic habitat provision to carbon sequestration. So in Manitoba, of course, we're no strangers to riprap, to stabilize shorelines along our lakes with the fluctuating water levels that have been experienced, riprap armoring, and of course here's a view of a salt marsh, not in Manitoba, but what a salt marsh looks like that helps provide a resilient buffer zone in coastal zone areas from storm surges. So that's a very sort of high level view of the various types of natural infrastructure that have been deployed and there's experience with out there in the professional community. And so that's just an introductory level. Again, the supplementary handouts can provide more information with links to references where you can look at more detail. But just a little bit of a quiz here, just to sort of test our knowledge of what we're soaking up here today. Your Slido poll should appear on your screen now. And this question here is, which of the following natural infrastructure solutions enhance resilience to stormwater, increase stormwater in urban areas? Okay, so we're talking urban areas. We're talking about stormwater management. Which of these? Select all that you think are of that type of infrastructure that would address that main climate resilience issue of increased stormwater in urban settings. Give everybody a few seconds to think about that, make your selections. All right, you can keep on submitting. Let's take a look and see what people are suggesting. Okay, so we do have a lot of people saying yes, permeable pavements, as we talked about, very important for a good natural infrastructure solution in urban environments. Bioswales to also help manage stormwater and runoff through engineered natural channels. We've got wetland restoration also being very helpful. Artificial reefs are, again, more for, I guess, that coastal storm surge. So you could argue, I guess, well, you couldn't argue, this is a stormwater issue, not sort of a storm surge issue. And of course, we've got beaches and dunes are more for that sea level rise and storm surge type setting. Of course, if you have a city right next to the coast, those will be totally valid answers. Okay, let's move on to another question here. Very similar type of a question. Which of the following natural infrastructure solutions can help enhance resilience to extreme heat in our cities and towns? So now we're talking about climate change. We're talking about more intense heat. We certainly saw that last summer. What are the types of nature-based solutions, natural infrastructure that can really help build resilience in cities and towns to extreme heat? Select all that you think makes sense. All right, what are we talking about? Okay, exactly. Trees and other vegetation, green roofs, hybrid green and reflective roofs, all very important. Fire breaks will, of course, be a bit more about dealing with wildfire management in cities where are in towns that are in forest zones, and then riparian buffers, of course, are a bit more related to erosion on banks. All right, okay, we're soaking it all up. Nicely done, everybody, on the polls. Let's now just take a look here at a few planning and design considerations at a very high level. Okay, so we're going to talk very high level here. These are planning and design considerations that are very sort of generic to a range of natural infrastructure, also to built infrastructure. Okay, so this is high level sort of planning and design considerations. Then we're going to have Hank Venema join us to talk about some specific design considerations, planning and design considerations for natural infrastructure, for a very specific type of natural infrastructure. But let's take a look first of all here at a few very useful planning and design criteria. We have here, courtesy of the Rockefeller Foundation and the firm Arup, a set of resilient planning and design criteria for cities, called them a City Resilience Framework. And I'll give it to you all at once here on this slide. And you can, of course, see go to the resource link for a lot more detail on each of these. But these are all extremely helpful. So from a planning and design perspective, integrated planning and design is really quite critical in this regard. So we're talking about bringing together and aligning systems to promote consistency in decision-making and investments across different types of infrastructure systems. And this is really quite critical. So if you're involved in asset management, municipal asset management, you're of course are talking a lot about managing costs, sustainable service delivery, risk, and we need to do that across infrastructure systems because they are interconnected. So integrated planning is a really important design consideration when you're talking about any type of natural infrastructure, in particular when you're looking at hybrid types of infrastructure. Robust planning and design. This is what it's all about in terms of climate resiliency, because we want assets that are designed and constructed and maintained that anticipate high impact climate events coming forward. We want to build resilience to those. We want to be robust to a range of possible climate futures that we're going to experience going forward here in Manitoba. We of course have a number of other planning and design considerations that deal with adaptability. So flexible design and planning, the willingness and ability to adopt alternative strategies in response to changing circumstances and sudden crisis. So that ability to really sort of change and take in the sort of the experience around us and adapt. Redundant approaches are really quite critical in terms of climate resilience because spare capacity to account for surges in demand is really quite a really common risk management strategy. So redundancy is a very important planning and design consideration for built as well as natural infrastructure. We've got reflective planning and design. That's where our experts, our professionals, our stakeholders, our institutions learn from experience and inform decision making. So we want to monitor, we want to evaluate performance. We want to continuously improve the systems that we're building to learn by doing as we go here. That's really important. We also want resourcefulness as a planning design criteria. We want to build the awareness of stakeholders and organizations so that everyone is aware of climate risks and are able to adapt to shocks and inform each other for approaches and that can quickly respond. We also want inclusive planning and design because we need as many perspectives as possible to really solve complex problems, bringing together knowledge, traditional knowledge, with natural infrastructure, built infrastructure. All right, so just to touch on a few of these before we get into a bit more detail, let's talk a bit more about some meta level considerations here that tie a few of these criterion together from the previous slide. You're going to hear a whole lot about whole of society approach when you are reading about climate resilience infrastructure. And here's an example, I guess at the federal level, where the emergency management framework of the federal emergency management framework talks about the sharing of emergency management responsibilities among federal, provincial, territorial governments themselves, as well as all their partners, including Indigenous people and communities, municipalities, volunteers, non-governmental organizations, private sector. It really requires a whole society approach to understand issues, build on past experience to really solve the resiliency challenges going forward that natural infrastructure can be part of. So whole society approach, remember that term. Sustainable development provides another really important meta level planning and design consideration because it really looks at a number of factors. It integrates across a number of issues. So the current sustainable development goals, the 17 goals span across society, economy, and the environment, gives us an integrated view of the types of co-benefits that are potentially out there, but the types of things that we don't want to cause decline in also through the construction of our infrastructure. And of course, it stresses the principle of inclusivity in terms of leaving no one behind in the process of building resiliency going forward. And just to highlight, before we end off here, a couple of slides on the whole participation aspect. Participatory and rights-based approaches. There are some good guidance coming out from the International Union for the Conservation of Nature on standards for nature-based solutions. And they're providing some really important, I guess, criterion for ensuring that feedback mechanisms and grievance resolution mechanisms are part of infrastructure design, ensuring that there is that participation in sort of consultation is based on mutual respect and equality, and upholds the rights of Indigenous peoples and to free and prior informed consent. We have criterion that's just really to involve stakeholders in the process and have the decision-making processes that can support that. So guidance out there that is helpful for working with nature-based solutions. And of course, other guidances that come at the periphery of that. We have coming from the Forest Peoples Program, just an example here of recommended areas for improving nature-based solutions in terms of financing and technical decision-making. So really stressing the importance of culture and secure land and resource rights, the need to avoid offsetting emissions and biodiversity loss. This is an important thing, and you'll hear about this as actually was heard about last fall during the Conference of the Parties for the Climate Change Convention. This is the article on the right, where there were Indigenous groups that expressed concern on, I guess, the use of nature-based solutions to offset carbon emissions, where offsetting is where maybe a company buys that offset and doesn't necessarily reduce their emissions, but is offset through purchasing the offset in a nature-based solution. And there is some resistance to that, and it's important for designers to be aware of that and understand those concerns. All right, so that was a very high-level and quick view of some planning and design considerations. I just have a quick question here before we cue Hank up here to give us a look, an under-the-hood look, I guess, at the planning and design of nature-based solutions. A quick question here. We didn't talk about this in the previous slides, but this is important. There's important aspects about risk. What factors in this list below can help you determine your level of risk? So of the different selections below, which of those, select all that apply, would help you determine your level of risk? And this is an important slide to think about here, because when we're talking about risk, we're going to hear a lot of different terminology. So think about this one. What factors determine the level of risk? All right, let's take a look. Okay, so this is, all right, so the majority of people were cluing in on some key terminology. So if you are working in disaster risk reduction, you may hear the terms hazard, exposure, and vulnerability as dials you can turn to help reduce risk. So those are three very important factors that determine risk level, and that's terminology used in disaster risk reduction. If you're an engineer working with the PIVC protocol, the Public Infrastructure Engineering Vulnerability Committee Risk Assessment Protocol, you will use terms like probability of an event and the severity of that event should that event occur. That's the terminology you'll hear, and municipal administrators will hear those terms when you're working with engineers. If you are working in sort of business risk management using international standards like the ISO standards, if you're dealing with risk management, you may hear a lot about likelihood and impact as the dials that really sort of affect risk. And I'm not going to argue if you selected the latitude, longitude, or time of day, because those all play in, but the main one was the terminology we were looking for. All right, okay. Hank, I cleared the deck here, hopefully somewhat effectively on terminology in the first session and some general planning and design criteria. So I do want to introduce right now a guest we have to help us through this next segment here. We have Hank Venema, who is the principal and senior engineer at Strategic Systems Engineering here in Winnipeg. He leads a diverse team of experts at his organization, specialized in climate risk analytics, geospatial informatics, hydraulic and natural infrastructure system design. Hank is a registered professional engineer, both here in Manitoba and Ontario, and he holds a PhD in systems and design engineering from the University of Waterloo. And also importantly, Hank has represented Canada on 3 intergovernmental panel on climate change assessments, the IPCC assessments, including the specialized report on 1.5 degrees warming. So we've got Hank, who has a lot of experience and a lot of expertise. And everybody fasten your seatbelts, because Hank likes details, and that's why we have him here today. So Hank, over to you to talk about a specific types of natural infrastructure and some planning and design considerations.
Well, thank you, Darren. I hope everyone can hear me. So I just want to express my gratitude to Engineers and Geoscientists Manitoba for the opportunity to contribute to this training. And what a delight it is to be working with Kurt and Darren again. Yes, thanks so much for this opportunity. There's my contact information if anyone wants to get a hold of me after we do the Q&A and in days ahead, please reach out. Next slide, please, Darren. So this is a key concept for this region. We're reveling in this 150 centimeter snowpack that turns into 150 millimeters of moisture, which we hope does not all sublimate. We hope we get a lot of infiltration, and we hope we get some runoff. I suspect we will. When we entered this winter, we were 600 millimeters below our, that was the cumulative deficit from January 2000. So yes, we have 150 millimeters in our front yards right now of moisture, and by golly, we need it, because the future, as this metric, as this graph indicates, is that we will see more drought episodes in the future. This is the harsh reality of climate change in the upper Great Plains of North America, is that we will have high precipitation events for sure in the future, for sure. We will also have, with high certainty, longer duration, more intense drought events. So we are blessed with this snowpack. Let's do our best to harvest it as a resource to get us through the dry spells ahead. Next slide, please. So this is just a bit of motivation, further motivation for why we're taking this combination flood and drought perspective to our natural infrastructure design processes. So we are the industry partner on the Integrated Modeling Program for Canada, which is a program within Global Water Futures based at the University of Saskatchewan, 10 universities around the country involved. And from that engagement, we learned about all of the modern gridded data products, including on evapotranspiration, on reanalyzed precipitation, on global soil data sets. All of that allowed us to construct a seamless hydrological model of the Red River Basin. There's no seam at the 49th parallel. This is the first time this has been done. We have a very high-performing, integrated Red River Basin hydrologic model done with HEC HMS. And the reason we did that is because we want to process the climate signal as analytically, formally as possible. Next slide, please. We used something called the NA Cordex data set, which is a joint Canadian American data product, an ensemble of global circulation models appropriate to North America that is seamless at the 49th parallel. So it is the climate data product one gravitates towards if you're analyzing transboundary basins, such as the Red River Basin. So the net of that analysis, as you see on the right here, most of the global circulation models show that we will see on average more precipitation in this region. Not all models agree. Some of the gray lines are below the red historical. So there's a little bit of variability. Most models say more precipitation. Where the models obviously agree is that we're getting warmer. That's a universal. So the tension in a hydrologic model is what force wins. Is it the perhaps more uncertain, but on average, greater amounts of precipitation? Will that influence win, or will it be the increased evapotranspiration from higher temperatures? A hydrologic model allows you to put those two different drivers into the same model and analyze the moisture balance that comes out. Next slide, please. And this is what we find, is that when we generate the outflows, the river flows, in this case at St. Agath, so Red River just south of the city of Winnipeg, we see several effects here. On average, our spring melts are lower and occur earlier than historic. And this year is perhaps the exception, but most years will have a lower snowpack and the runoff will occur earlier with a lower overall spring flood peak. We will have lower flows through the agricultural growing season, which is concerning. Some models, though, show this property of flash flooding from extreme precipitation in summer. So that property persists in the modeling as well. The key messages here are that we have both elevated flood and drought risk. If you look at the ensemble of models, we see a 7% reduction in overall water supply with big shifts in seasonality. The sum total of that is, we believe we need to adopt a water harvesting culture. We need to seize the opportunities, such as this runoff season, to harvest water for the drought episodes ahead. Next slide, please. So, given this concern about elevated flood and drought risk, and the prospect of layering in additional co-benefits around environmental protection, we're inspired by this concept of natural infrastructure. And this is, Darren presented some definitions earlier. This is another one that the Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment produced in 2018. And similar language, basically essentially combining engineering with ecology. The simplest way to put it is it's this convergence of engineering and ecology. It can be, you can basically be, aggregating the effect of existing natural features, or you can be constructing them. The other key point that comes across strongly in the literature that we're going to develop here is that natural infrastructure stacks multiple benefits. Typically has a high return on investment if you can monetize the different benefits that you're creating. If you have a credible way of monetizing those benefits, you'll typically generate a high return on investment for your natural infrastructure project. In sum, if you have natural infrastructure, keep it. If you need it, build it. Next slide, please. Just put slightly differently, in the temperate northern hemisphere, we have a spring flood risk, and then we have a growing season drought risk. The loss of natural infrastructure exacerbates both risks, whereas if you had something resembling the pre-settlement landscape, you would have natural buffers that would attenuate, modulate, reduce flood risk. And that water that was attenuated would be available to reduce drought risk later in the year. So conversely, why not invest in natural infrastructure to modulate flood risk, modulate drought risk, and essentially move water from when you get it in your flood season to when you need it in your drought season? That's we regard as the design challenge, the design opportunity. Next slide, please. Here's some examples. Darren's talked about the Pelly's Lake work. I was involved as well in that project over the years. Wonderful project. Richard Grossens, who was in the video, masterful job. with that project. We have, in our own work at Strategic Systems Engineering, we are running a similar project in Grants Lake, and we're involved in another nutrient phytoextraction project in the near the town of Oakburn, Manitoba. In all cases, it's about water harvesting for flood risk, drought risk, and nutrient capture. Floodwaters are high in nutrients. If we can find ways to capture and store and phytoextract those nutrients with vegetation, as Pelly's Lake, as Grants Lake, and as Oakburn demonstrate, we start to stack multiple co-benefits. So whether it's floodwater or lagoon discharge, that's a resource. That's not a waste product. That's a resource. Next slide, please. We also at Strategic, we use LiDAR extensively, LiDAR as a geospatial data asset, the same way global circulation models are geospatial data assets. Gridded evapotranspiration and precipitation data products are important geospatial assets. LiDAR is another very important geospatial assets which we use to accelerate natural infrastructure systems design from field to basin scale. Next slide, please. So LiDAR is great. I mean, the province of Manitoba deserves full marks. Has basically 100% coverage within the Red River Basin, as is pictured here, and throughout essentially all of municipal Manitoba now. The last few gaps were filled within the last 18 months or so. So yeah, we have pretty much comprehensive 1 meter resolution digital elevation model for all of Manitoba, unlike just about anywhere else in Canada, with the exception of New Brunswick, actually, which also has good LiDAR coverage at a provincial scale. So we're in a data-rich environment here, and we're using it. Next slide, please. Case study from the rural municipality of Hanover. We conducted this project in collaboration with our client, the St. Rat Rosa Watershed District, through Federation of Canadian Municipality funding. Next slide, please. So here we have the large outline is all of the St. Rat Rosa Watershed District, very large area. The yellow box is the rural municipality of Hanover, and it straddles several watersheds, the Manning, the Turande, and the Joubert Rat. Next slide, please. What we've done is we've generalized a local technology, local earthworks, linear berm construction, gated culverts. These are basically technologies and construction techniques available basically anywhere in rural Manitoba. And what we're doing is we're trying to express that those resilience principles around inclusiveness, appropriate technology, local engagement, doing things that make sense on the ground in the communities where we work. These have been the project partners have, you know, perfect is maybe strong, but they have a very impressive experience base with these construction techniques. So our strategy was to attempt to generalize them for larger scale investment. Next slide, please. What we've done is we've created a monetization framework where we explicitly calculate the flood damages on different asset classes. Here you see it visualized as flooding on agricultural land, flooding on road infrastructure, and flooding on built infrastructure, actually buildings. And conversely, the benefits of investing in natural infrastructure to reduce those damages. There's a formality around this in the scientific literature and recently in explicit damage functions published by Public Service Canada. So we're integrating the best of the scientific literature, the best of the published Canadian guidance documents into formal risk analytic frameworks. Next slide, please. So building the investment case, this is a key idea. We're stacking up the benefits of flood protection, of drought protection, and where we can, of water quality and habitat protection, and presenting a total investment case to funders. Next slide, please. So this is what it looks like. The design space is all of the places where we could conceivably build these linear berms for water retention. Next slide, please. And then there's a geospatial pruning exercise to get down to the feasible locations where it's actually possible, where we don't have conflicts with existing infrastructure of various types. Next slide, please. This is a subsetted visualization. We use principles of optimization, which is intelligent search, in this case, genetic algorithm. We're using cloud compute available through Amazon Web Services. And we run these algorithms to sort through the near infinite number of combinations to find the best set of berm locations, construction locations within the project budget. Next slide, please. So here you see some benefit cost ratios published for, this is water supply and flood risk reduction using a very conservative monetization. And we're coming up with benefit cost ratios in the order of 1.7, 1.5. Not fabulous, but pretty good. Interestingly, Infrastructure Canada expects a benefit cost ratio above 2 for the Investing in Canada infrastructure program. So we're not quite there yet. Next slide, please. So here you can see the sort of logic, and there's an interesting nuance to this analysis. So the genetic algorithm keeps searching and searching and searching. By the 24th generation, we've got our benefit cost ratio in this example up to 1.5. And interestingly, we actually applied a floor to the constraint. We needed to get the capital cost above $20 million for a particular funding program. So we're above it. And we've got a benefit cost ratio of 1.5. Not terrible, but not great. Next slide, please. And the annotation, one more mouse click, Darren. So this is the interesting feature. When we include that water quality benefit of active management and phosphorus removal, as is done at Pelly's Lake, and we conservatively monetize the benefit of that water quality here as $60 per kilogram of phosphorus. Water quality trading programs around North America are consistently valuing phosphorus around $200 a kilogram, but very modestly monetized, $60 a kilogram for phosphorus removal as a management feature of this network of natural infrastructure sites. All of a sudden, our benefit cost ratio goes up to almost 3. Next slide, please. That's basically the end of my slides. Just wanted to remind folks on the call that Environment Canada has published a Prairie Province's Climate Perspectives report. And the idea of collaborative water management is very prominent in that report. And we regard the kind of support that we're providing watershed districts and their partners, rural municipalities, as at least a start in this regard of building those rich collaborations that are necessary to attract investment into building climate resilience via natural infrastructure. So I'll leave it at that.
Excellent, Hank. Thanks you very much for giving us the under the hood look at what really goes into design of natural infrastructure, in this case, the flood and drought management on a prairie landscape. And you did nicely set us up for our next session, which we're going to talk about financing considerations. So benefit cost analysis playing a big role in natural infrastructure and nature-based solutions, which we'll get into. I saw in the chat space a number of questions have popped up that will be quite interesting to get to. We're going to save those for the Q&A session right at the end of the training. But I'm thinking about, in terms of a lot of the attendees here now are from different have different interests in urban environments, different types of natural infrastructure. Your point, the point you made about that there's a data-rich environment right now in some respects that allow certain types of analysis, like using LiDAR for optimization. That's an interesting aspect, and you've been able to use some design aspects for optimization for flood and drought management. Do you see that extrapolable, that optimization, that systems optimization process for other types of natural infrastructure? Let's say you're in heat environments for maybe building urban forests or placing roofs. Is there an extrapolable? This takes us outside of what you just talked about, but the systems process.
I think there's very much an analogy that I could conceive of sort of with urban heat island, there's white roofs and such, and reflective pavement. Those ideas have come up already. The idea of green canopy as an urban heat island protective mechanism is really important. I've done a little bit of work in that area, and I think it's extremely important. I think it's essentially, it would be a similar optimization exercise with a budget cap and with a unit cost of building green infrastructure in an urban landscape. Where are the locations that would maximize benefit, have the greatest net cooling effect for the most people? And it would be a kind of similar to this, a combined simulation optimization, where you'd be searching spatial configurations of investment to get that best bang for your buck, where you're protecting the most people at the lowest cost, most efficiently. So I envision it as also a spatial optimization. That's just one example off the top of my head.
Yeah, good. No, thank you. I knew we could rely on your systems engineering perspective and academic training to kind of think about the extrapolability of the system optimization process. And of course, now this whole of society and integrated approach to natural infrastructure design is important, because not only do we need to make use of tools like this, data and modeling, but also sort of the engagement of the stakeholders and the experts that can bring different perspectives to bear on natural infrastructure is really an important part of all of the asset management process on cost, risk, and service delivery. So Hank, thank you very much. Hope you can stay on for a little bit at the end for some Q&A, because I saw some interesting ones in the chat space. But we're going to move on now.
Thank you.
Excellent. Hank, thank you very much. Our last session here, last but certainly not least, we want to touch on financing considerations for natural infrastructure. And in particular, because there are some nuances here that separate natural infrastructure from built infrastructure, and we'll touch on that. One is sort of in the benefit cost analysis area, and the other is in mobilizing capital for natural infrastructure. It's a bit different than what we would traditionally think of in terms of doing for built or gray infrastructure. So let's just take this, we'll try to take the training to a relatively smooth landing here over the next 15 minutes before we get to the Q&A, or the closing and the Q&A. But first of all, let's talk about benefit cost analysis. And you saw some of Hank's slides touching on that important aspect. Benefit cost analysis for natural infrastructure goes further than what a traditional benefit cost analysis would do, because it uses a total economic value approach to capture both the direct and the indirect costs and benefits. Because we talked a lot earlier about co-benefits being an important part of nature-based solutions. And this idea of ecosystem goods and services provides, I guess, a menu of things to look for in terms of benefits and costs. So what does that look like, I guess, in a bit more detail? Well, before we do that, I'd like to just get a bit of a sense for your experience level with regard to benefit costs. So now, doing benefit cost analysis for natural infrastructure specifically, what's your experience level? So we got the poll on the screen here. It should show up on your phone. Have you never done benefit cost analysis for built or natural infrastructure? Have you done some, but not for natural infrastructure? And have you done a benefit cost analysis for like multiple infrastructure solutions? So we got a lot where this is a bit of a new concept. We have a lot of folks online here where you've done benefit cost analysis likely for traditional built infrastructure, other types of facilities, and some that have really been getting hands-on with natural infrastructure. All right, excellent. So what we see now with benefit cost analysis for natural infrastructure, there really are an actual really robust set of methods out there for getting at the range of co-benefits that natural infrastructure can provide. And the different methods sort of, I guess you can parse them out. So to the left more are the more tangible costs, the benefits, the more tangible values that arise from a nature-based solution. And on the far right, it gets a little bit less tangible, and there's different sets of methods. So, for example, if we're talking about the more direct costs and benefits of natural infrastructure, we would use the market price methods, avoided cost methods, replacement cost methods, methods that a lot of engineers are quite familiar with. So for example, in market price, many of the applicable goods or many of the natural infrastructure can provide goods. For example, if it does have a water body involved, maybe there could be the nature-based solution provides opportunities for recreational fishing. And there's a value to that. Or there is recreation that may be provided through a particular nature-based solution, whether it be a forest area or even involving a water body, and there could be a direct revenue created from that. So those are direct market prices, methods that we're familiar with. Avoided cost, for example, if the value of a flood control service, for example, can be derived from estimating the damage if the flood were to occur. So that's an avoided cost. I think many are familiar with that. A replacement cost, for example, the value of groundwater recharge can be estimated from the cost of obtaining water from another source, so a replacement. Mitigation and restoration costs. For example, if you have a preventative expenditure, let's say a wetland service provides some, or there's some flood barrier protection that is provided through a nature-based solution, that could actually there could be a cost associated with that is saved. Production functions, of course, if a nature-based solution improves soil fertility and improves crop yield, there can be an increase, a function that shows you an increase in production as a resulting from a nature-based solution. So some of those are things that we're familiar with as working with infrastructure or facilities. As we move more to the right, there are more sort of maybe indirect costs that are also important co-benefits. And those are different methods. For example, the travel cost method is really quite applicable if your nature-based solution, whether it may be, for example, a retention pond in a suburb or an urban forest that increases the value of property just because of the aesthetics or the recreational opportunities, there is an impact on property values, and that can also be harnessed to help understand the benefits from your nature-based solution. But there's some nuances to those methods that maybe engineers aren't so used to applying. There's also, and that's the hedonic pricing method. Travel cost methods are more if your nature-based solution, for example, provides a really interesting educational opportunity for people and experts from academia, and they travel a distance to go visit that site to learn about that opportunity and share best practices. That amount of money that is spent getting to somewhere can be valued as a co-benefit using a travel cost method. Of course, there are a lot of other methods like willingness to pay surveys and contingent valuation surveys that help you understand the value, the cultural benefits of certain sites, for example, and those require a little bit more nuanced survey techniques that economists, you may need to enlist the services of an economist to really help out with. So anyways, there's a handout provided in the supplemental handout that you'll receive that provides a link to all these methods, a little description and where you can go to for more information. But this is a nice little handy toolkit right here. Another really handy piece is the ecosystem goods and services, the menu of the types of things, goods and services that nature-based solutions can provide. And there's lists out there that have been developed through peer review processes. And those lists I find are extremely helpful in doing benefit cost analysis because it really does provide you with a whole menu of things that your nature-based solution could be providing as a co-benefit or a targeted actual outcome. Whether it's a provisioning service like providing food or water, whether it's a cultural service or good, or whether it's a regulating service like providing a pollination, enhanced ability for pollinating of crops through of course, through bees. and regulating water flows through natural drainage. So anyways, this is a really, really handy list, and there's a good reference there to go in to dig into more detail. We're going to just take a look at just an example here, just one example right now of benefit cost analysis for urban type natural infrastructure. So if you're working with heat effects in urban settings, even in moisture management situations, urban forests play a really critical role. And so, for example, here in Toronto, we have the statistics showing that urban forests provide over $80 million per year in benefits. And that's through stormwater management, air quality, energy savings, and also carbon sequestration. Similarly, also in Toronto, the data shows that for every dollar invested in maintaining the tree coverage in Toronto, that returns nearly $3.20 of benefits to residents. So a benefit cost ratio of 3.2 to 1 through the use of urban forests. And just from a broader sort of perspective, the study of 86 Canadian municipalities was undertaken that found that trees remove about 16 megatons of air pollution annually, leading to human health benefits valued at about 227 million per year, which is quite significant. So really important sort of benefit cost aspects. I'm gonna sort of, well, very quickly, there's a slide here that you'll see in your in the slides that you'll receive as part of this training that talks about some more examples of flood and water storage that Hank got into. I'm not going to spend much time on this slide other than that it's there. And the number at the bottom right corner, 3.71 is really the benefit cost ratio of backflooded dams in the prairie landscape. And that's due, so these are just sort of rural landscapes where we're using berms to hold back water temporarily in flood situations, in extreme water situations. And those nature-based natural infrastructure solutions really have quite low capital costs typically, and quite low operating costs, as you can see there on the right, far right. And so the benefits, whether it's through avoided drought or new wetland habitat or cattails produced and harvested, carbon credits, avoided flooding costs, the benefits accrue and the benefit cost ratios can be significant for these types of natural. But very quickly, just a couple of short videos to show you here on switching gears here now to mobilizing capital. So different from built infrastructure, natural infrastructure requires just a little bit of different approach, just because it's because of the newness and the sort of, I guess, the difference of natural infrastructure. And what we have here is Dimple Roy is a co-author of a report here called Mobilizing Capital for Natural Infrastructure in Canada. And she's the director of the water program at the International Institute for Sustainable Development. And she's currently leading a multi-year initiative on scaling up natural infrastructure on the Canadian prairies. Let's hear from Dimple a bit here on the nuances of mobilizing mobilizing capital for natural infrastructure.
While natural infrastructure solutions are often more cost efficient than built alternatives and provide a range of co-benefits, attracting funding for these projects is unfortunately lagging. Natural infrastructure projects often emerge from non-traditional proponents, watershed groups, research agencies, and other experts outside of governments and typical beneficiaries of infrastructure projects. This means that these projects require a business case to attract financing for their development and their implementation. Natural infrastructure projects are often also lagging behind their engineered counterparts because of a lack of design and performance standards. For example, where avoided risks are not as easily or predictably quantified. Also, while these natural infrastructure projects provide many co-benefits, these co-benefits are often difficult to quantify or assign monetary value to.
Now, we just want to take a look at, so there's nuances because of, in terms of the audience and the type of infrastructure compared to built infrastructure, but Dimples also could talk a bit about guidance for how to mobilize capital given that sort of unique set of conditions, audience, drivers, investors, and the like. So there's a few key sort of steps that proponents can take for ensuring better success in financing for natural infrastructure. And Dimple's going to talk a bit about that here, and we'll show just a few minutes of what she's saying.
For project proponents, we provide a few specific steps. First, project proponents must identify a driver for action. This might include provincial compliance mandates, such as in the case of wastewater treatment, or mitigating risks associated with future disasters such as floods. In financing terms, a question to ask is, who loses money if this driver takes effect or the status quo deteriorates? Second, identify a strong primary beneficiary or project implementer. Similar to the question asked in the previous step, projects with a clear and specific beneficiary with clear, quantifiable, highest quality benefits are best to drive funding. While there is a tendency to collect information and data for all co-benefits, the focus must be on identifying the largest and clearest benefits and beneficiaries. Third, develop a pitch. Our research shows that the biggest investments in natural infrastructure are in response to large, certain, and urgent drivers of change, such as impending regulations or major financial losses. Future benefits and policy goals are frequently motivators for smaller pilot projects or exploratory impact investments. Next, establish a partnership. Recognizing that natural infrastructure projects require skill sets beyond any one organization, set up collaborative agreements for next stages of planning and development support. And finally, secure catalyst or pre-development funding. This allows proponents to create a plan, develop an investment case, and plan the implementation of the project. Proponents should particularly resist the temptation of looking for sources of funding as opposed to identifying the drivers, benefits, and beneficiaries as suggested.
So that's the key. So thank you very much, Dimple, for providing us that recorded message. And this guidance is a really useful one. The benefit, defining what is that real benefit and communicating that to the beneficiary is really the key message there. In the supplemental handouts, we provide a list of projects, natural infrastructure projects, where this type of information, this type of approach really was taken. And that you can see a range of examples both in Canada and around the world. So that's takes us right, I guess, to the end here. So Kurt, I'm going to return the floor to you, and just to say that, and I guess in summary, we did cover a lot of territory today in this introductory session, but the key thing is that we have a lot of natural infrastructure available with a lot of experience in deploying for various types of landscapes in Manitoba. So lots of information out there. We're seeing a lot more application, a lot more interest. And so we're glad that there was a good participation here today. And we look forward to your experience in scaling up natural infrastructure across the prairies. So thank you very much. And Kurt, back to you.
Well, just excellent presentations there from you, Darren, from Hank, and from Dimple, and expanding our knowledge of nature-based infrastructure and the possibilities that lie therein. And so I think we'll wrap up this session here. I've put in a link in the chat there to a place to go to get recordings later on of this session will be available in about a week or so, probably, so you can access it there. And we will be, I've been extracting some of the questions that have come up in the chat, and we'll be carrying on the conversation at the end of the 90 minutes that we've allocated for the main session here. But what we're going to do is we're going to take a very brief few-second break, and then come back for. Don't go away. If you have the time, we will continue the discussion afterwards. So, but that brings us to the end of the official session, and thank you very much for your participation.